Welcome back. In this tutorial, we will basically be talking about query design and running a query to basically retrieve information that's already present in the database. Okay, as I mentioned earlier in the previous tutorial, this is really looking at the database or the data in the database and basically having a different view of the data based on business needs. Okay, so what we would do for this tutorial is to design a query that retrieves information about let's say rich customers. But to be more accurate, we want to be able to retrieve information about accounts that have a balance of greater than $2,000 as an example. Okay, again, just to refresh your memory, remember that we have two tables, table account and table customer. Table customer, we have two customers, right? One in Boston, one in New York, and for the and each of these customers have two accounts with varying bank balances. Okay, so based on the criteria we set, we'll have a different list of accounts, bank accounts. Okay, so let's see how we would retrieve information from the data that's present in these two tables. Okay, so to do that, what we need to do is basically switch the views here on the left hand side from tables to queries. Okay, we need to create a new query. Again, depending on the Access version you're using, you may see a different interface, but the basic idea is you need to be in queries and look for a button or an option that basically asks you to use the query design to design the query. Okay, there are multiple ways of doing the same thing, but I'd rather we work with the design view. Okay, so pick the query design option to create a new query. So you see an interface that looks somewhat like this, regardless of the Access version you use. This should list all the tables that are already present in the database, and of course we have two tables present. We can either add them individually, or you can simply press Shift, right, and add both tables at once. Close this dialog box, and of course if you want, you can move the tables around, and I'd like to do that for my purposes, but if you don't want to do that, that's okay. And I also like to move this a little bit up. Remember, you can grab the handle and move this around. Okay, so we have two tables: table customer with specific attributes, 4 attributes, and table account with 5 attributes. And if you have followed along the tutorial in the last correctly, you should also see this relationship 1 to infinity. Remember this from the second tutorial, we created a relationship, and we basically said having this 1 to infinity means that referential integrity is enforced, meaning one customer can have multiple accounts. Okay, and one account can only belong to one customer. Okay, so let's start. In this case, if we wanted to list accounts having a balance of more than $1,000, let's say, or more than $2,000, let's start there. Think about the information we need. Okay, I'm going to go first to customer table, select customer name, drag and drop it to the table below like this, very easy, and then select customer city, drag and drop it to the table below, customer city from table customer. Then let's say I also want account type, so I'm going to drag and drop account type, and let's say I want account balance. Okay, drag and drop it. So I have now 4 fields, right, from 2 tables. Okay, and as I mentioned, let's say that for our business, for this bank, maybe the criteria greater than 2,000 makes sense. Okay, let's see what happens. So we have set a criteria now, and it's basically telling Access to list all accounts with the balance greater than 2,000. Okay, and not only that, also to show what type of account it is, to whom that account belongs to, and where does this customer live in. Okay, so now let's see what comes up. To do that, we need to run the query. So that button should be somewhere here on the left hand side. Just click run. So it's basically telling you there's only one account owned by Kim living in Boston that satisfies the criteria. and that account happens to have a balance of $50,000. Okay, so let's say that we want to change the criteria slightly. Okay, so let's switch back to the design view, go back to view here, switch back to the design view. Okay, now let's say that I want to change the criteria to 1,000. Again, remember, this is based on business need. Okay, if the bank is catering to very wealthy clients, maybe the criteria should be more than $1 million or more than $100,000. Okay, it really depends on the specific organization's business needs. Okay, so let's assume that we need the criteria to be bank balance more than $1,000. Okay, so let's run this, and now we have 3 records, right? So we have the original record from Kim, saving account balance of $50,000, but now we also have checking account from Kim and savings account from Jim. Okay, and of course this is only useful if the database has thousands or even hundreds or even thousands of records, right? In our make-believe example, we have 2 customers and 4 accounts, so it's easy for me, even without a query, just to go to the table and have a look and find the answer. But this becomes much easier, right, for different sorts of queries, right? Rich accounts or rich customers, whichever query that I want, right? Or list of customers who live in New York. So all of these possibilities are much easier using Access queries. Okay, this is basically giving you a view of a subset of the data, right, that's present in the table, and that data could live across multiple tables, not just one table but more than one table. Really depends on what kind of query, what kind of view you want to see. Okay, so I hope that's very clear. Now let's try one more thing. Okay, let's switch back to the design view, and let's say that for privacy's sake, okay, I don't want whoever was seeing this, right, query, I don't want them to see the bank balance. Okay, I only want to see the accounts listed. Okay, so here you actually have an option for this. All you need to do is come down this row and uncheck. And now let's try uncheck under account balance, right? Even though we are using the criteria here to set what kind of row should be shown, we are actually telling Access not to show the criteria, right? Account balance. Rather, we're telling Access not to show the attribute, right? Attribute that we used to basically list the rich accounts. Okay, so let me click on run, and you see the same result again, but the only difference is you don't see the account balance, right? Similarly, I can uncheck or not even have account type if I did not want that. So it's up to us. We can play with this as much as we want. It's very useful and very flexible, and this is an example of query tool that we discussed in class. Okay, this is an example of a very simple query that I can even use on a transactional database like Access. Okay, so now let me switch back here to the view, but instead of going to the right now we are on datasheet view. We started working on the design view. I just want to show you very briefly, you don't need this for the project, something called the SQL view. Okay, interesting. So if you did not really have MS Access helping you out visually, right, dragging and dropping the queries, this is literally how you would write the code. Select, right, table customer, this is a table name, dot customer name, comma, table customer, which is a table, dot customer city, right, comma, table account, so second table, dot account type, from this particular table, and there's an operation called inner join with the second table on table customer dot customer ID equal to table account dot customer ID. You remember the relationship where the cust ID is linked to customer ID. So now you're specifying it here. Okay, and the criteria is in the last line where table account dot account balance is greater than 1,000. So you would literally write a code like this. It's called SQL, right? This is what you would use to retrieve information from these different tables present in a database. Okay, because you are using Access, you guys get lucky. You don't need to use a SQL view, or you don't need to write SQL query. Instead, you will be working from the design view. Okay, so once you have the design view, you can either run it or you can switch to datasheet view to see the results. Very easy for you. Don't need to do the SQL view. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the queries. As I mentioned, from here on out, it becomes very, very easy. Okay, and you would do something very similar for your project. The only thing I want to remind you is that when you're doing the project, make sure that you only have the tables that you need. Don't keep other tables. Okay, if you do that, you should be fine for the project. Okay, so I'm going to close the queries now. And in the next tutorial, we'll talk about a different way of looking at the data that's there in the database. Okay, query is one way. When you say this, it's going to ask you, do you want to save the design of the query 1? I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to call it QRY. Let's say rich accounts. I could have called it customers, but it really is a list of bank accounts. Okay, query rich accounts. That's what I'm going to call it. See you in the next tutorial. Bye.